On the night of December 2nd, 1984, in Bhopal, India, something unthinkable happened. The very air people were breathing turned into a deadly poison. This was the start of the world's worst industrial disaster. So, we're going to dig into how a tragedy like this could even happen, why it was so incredibly deadly, and why, believe it or not, its story is far from over. And this quote, man, it just perfectly frames the whole story. The Bhopal disaster, it isn't just some historical event we can look back on. It's a critical and frankly still very relevant cautionary tale about the real human cost when companies get things wrong. So yeah, that's the big question, right? How does the air itself become a weapon? Well, it wasn't just one single mistake. It was a horrifying chain of events, a whole cascade of failures that all lined up to create one absolutely catastrophic moment. Okay, so let's start at the source, the Union Carbide India Limited plant. Now, this place was built to produce a pesticide called Savin. The thing is, by the early 1980s, the plant wasn't making any money, and that's when the company started making some truly terrible decisions to cut costs. And when you lay it all out like this, you can literally see the disaster being built piece by piece. First, they slashed safety staff and cut training way back. That created a huge knowledge gap. Then, they just turned off the essential safety systems. I mean, the very things that were supposed to be the last line of defense. And finally, to save a few bucks on the electricity bill, they shut down the refrigeration unit for this incredibly volatile gas. Each step, driven purely by cost cutting, just kept piling on the risk. It was a ticking time bomb. And all of that, it led directly to this moment. A simple mistake, some water getting into a storage tank, kicked off a violent runaway chemical reaction. But remember, all the safety systems were off. So there was absolutely nothing to stop the pressure from building and building until the tank just gave way. And in an instant, 40 tons of toxic gas began to silently pour out, blanketing a sleeping city. So what exactly was in that poison cloud? I mean, to really understand the devastating human toll of that night, you have to understand what this stuff actually does to a person on a biological level. The chemical was called methyl isocyanate, or MIC for short. Now, think of it this way. This chemical aggressively hunts for water. And since our bodies are mostly water, its attack was simple and just brutal. It literally turned the body's own moisture into a weapon against itself, causing catastrophic damage from the inside out. The effects were immediate and just horrifying. When people breathed it in, it caused what's called massive pulmonary edema in their lungs. They were, in essence, drowning in their own bodily fluids. But it didn't stop there. The gas got into their bloodstream, causing a kind of cyanide poisoning that attacked the entire central nervous system. And here's where it gets just absolutely tragic. That basic human instinct, the one that screams at you to flee from danger, well, on that night, it made everything so much worse. So why was running so deadly? You have to understand MIC gas is heavier than air, so the thickest, most poisonous part of the cloud stayed low to the ground. When people panicked and ran, they started breathing deeper and faster, pulling that super concentrated gas deep down into their lungs. The very act of trying to escape was what sealed their fate. You see, the disaster didn't end when the gas cloud finally blew away. Not even close. For the survivors and their families, that night was just the beginning of a crisis that has spanned generations and is still going on today. The legacy of that night, it's this awful, vicious cycle. The ground itself is still contaminated, which poisons the community. That leads to chronic, lifelong health problems for the survivors. And they, in turn, can pass on health issues to their children. Each part of this just keeps feeding the others. Many survivors now suffer from something they call Bhopal lung, a permanent respiratory disease. Their immune systems are shot, and the psychological trauma is, as you can imagine, immense. There's a heartbreaking phrase used to describe them, the living dead, because so many live with permanent, debilitating disabilities. And the poison was passed down. Right after the disaster, there was a huge spike in stillbirths and infant deaths. But even now, decades later, children born in the affected areas have significantly higher rates of birth defects. It's just a horrifying echo of that single night. And if all that wasn't bad enough, the source of the poison is still there. The plant was just abandoned. It was never properly cleaned up. We're talking about thousands of tons of toxic waste that are still there, slowly seeping into the groundwater that the local community depends on every single day. Which, of course, brings us to our final question, the search for justice. I mean, after a disaster of this magnitude, you would expect a swift and serious legal response, right? But, yeah, that's not what happened at all. So in 1989, Union Carbide paid a settlement to the Indian government for $470 million. And, okay, on the surface, that sounds like a lot of money. But let's put that number into perspective. Once that money was divided up among hundreds of thousands of victims, many survivors received as little as $500. $500. I mean, that's not even enough to cover medical bills for a year, let alone a lifetime of pain and suffering. So what about the people in charge? The man at the top? Warren Anderson, the CEO of Union Carbide, was actually charged with culpable homicide by the Indian government. But he never stood trial. He just stayed in the United States as a fugitive from Indian law and died back in 2014, never facing a single legal consequence for his role in the disaster. And let's be absolutely clear about this. This wasn't some unavoidable accident. All the evidence shows it was entirely preventable. It's the ultimate, haunting reminder of what happens when profit is put before people. The cost is always, always measured in human lives. And that's why this story still matters so much today. The fight is not over. The survivors of Bhopal and their families are still fighting for the most basic things: clean water, decent medical care, and the justice that they've been denied for decades. And that really leaves us with one final, sobering question to think about. The warning signs in Bhopal were ignored, and the result was catastrophic. That was 1984. So, what warnings are we ignoring today?